Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060 with Pioneer Field Agronomist Allie and Josh Schaffner. Here's Josh and Allie.
Good morning, Southeast Minnesota. Today is March 10th, 2021. Josh, this is episode number 63. Exciting time of the year. I like it when we get to this middle part of March. Obviously, we've been in the planning phase with customers for quite a while now, but those really start to pick up pace as this weather warms up. And I'm always intrigued by all the different avenues that some of our conversations take. There's always a ton of different ideas that get thrown at us that folks are looking to try. And I think it's maybe important today just to talk about on-farm trials in general, maybe how we can assess some of these things we're looking to try, and maybe what are some trials we should be keeping top of our mind. So for starters today, I think we should start on the soybean side of things.
Yeah, and when you think about trials today, and in some cases, growers probably get tense when they think of a trial. That they think about planter cleanouts or additions or this and that. And I think the first thing when we do think about trials today, it's maybe a little different approach. In some cases, we might still be doing some more labor intensive trials, but in some cases, Allie, we can also look at this from a digital standpoint where we can set up trials that can be a card in, card out kind of trial. So, I encourage growers to think of on-farm trials. I think every grower should do some kind of an on-farm trial each and every year, just from a standpoint of, what are some of the new trends? Could this work for me? And just trying to identify, what are those new things that are going to, maybe drive yield or drive return on investment, which is probably even front and center more important. But I thought in segment one here, Allie, maybe talk about soybeans. Then in segment two, we'll talk about corn trials. From a soybean standpoint, Allie, it a lot of things going on. There's a lot of things we can be looking at. We're going to do a little bit of work too, but the first thing that always comes to my mind with soybeans today is looking at it just a simple trial of population.
Yeah, it's, as I've been at meetings this winter, especially, that's becoming a bigger part of the topic of conversation. I think soybean seeding rate can arguably be one of the most heavily debated, decisions that we make in that soybean crop. And a lot of folks are talking about, how much could we consider ratcheting back our soybean populations to really find that kind of sweet spot and just really efficient use of that seed across farms. So as we look at maybe analyzing some lower pops versus our average right at that 140, or maybe even some higher populations, what are some different ways in your mind of how we could easily set that up?
Yeah, a couple of things we could do to set up a population trial. If you do have a variable rate seed capability, we could look at a randomized block structure to that, where we could assist making a variable rate prescription, where maybe we're going to look at, you could look at 4 replications of what you are doing now. You could look at maybe 4 replications of maybe what you're thinking about doing, or maybe a higher population, and then also maybe looking at 4 blocks that could be lower populations, maybe as low as 120 or even 100. In some cases, there is a little bit of interest in really understanding lower populations and the importance of singulation or row spacing, which is as we look at more speed tubes and eliminating that, basically having planters that can really singulate soybeans at a really accurate level can be something to look at. And in some cases, maybe even going lower than that in some situations. I've been reading some studies of, if you can get really uniform, perfect spacing, that there could be some value even in some extremely low populations. And Allie, that's something I'm sure you're looking at, and I'm trying to find a couple of cooperators to work on trials like this. Or on the flip side, you could also just look at it and doing strip trials, where you can look at some side by sides, or if you can change rate on the fly, even just some long strip trials can be a really easy way to do it, Allie.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of justification, currently to really assessing some of these lower planting populations. You look at, in some cases, maybe in these trials in the past, we've seen lack of soybean yield response to increased populations. And I think you can agronomically explain a lot of that just due to the fact that we know that, plant to plant spacing in soybeans, I think we've found to be very, very important. It contributes to more branching, ultimately pods. And ultimately more yield. So I think there's a lot in that space that we'll continue to assess as we move forward. How about, you talked a little bit about like soybean singulation or planning or some of the ExactEmerge planters. Anything there that folks could take a look at, just in terms of maybe plant spacing between an ExactEmerge versus the historical speed tubes, or just different setups that way?
Yeah, it's always a hard trial to get side by side because it would take two planter systems to do it. However, it's something we talked a lot about in corn for years, and some of the data suggests that it might be equally important, if maybe even not a little more important, in soybeans. And again, there's a lot of planters that maybe today we currently can't really manage that at hyper accurate spacing. But again, with more speed tube technology coming to the farm gate, I think it's probably going to be one of the number one things in soybean as we look at really driving the next yield level, is that we're going to have to, we've talked about early planting, we've talked about seed treatment, we've talked about the importance of fungicide. I think the next big thing in soybeans is going to be really accurate spacing. Like you said, it really helps branching. And if you really watch, really investigate looking at soybean spacing and pulling plants, you'll see when you get, 10 or 12 plants that are spaced perfectly, just how much more branching, the pod counts are higher. And that's just something we really got to look at. And when we come out of break, Allie, we'll talk about some on-farm trials from a corn standpoint and talk about some of the newer and latest, greatest things in that arena. Welcome back, listeners. Allie, with all the warm weather, we're talking trials today. And we talked a little bit about some soybean trial opportunities, talked about, population getting to be a really big thing, singulation really getting to be popular in soybeans. And we talked about some of the other, high yield soybean factors that we've kind of been talking about this off season. Shifting gears to corn, obviously a lot of things we can do there. Population is still something that I always like to have some growers do some strip trials of that, just to try to understand, kind of their practices and what population can be. But sometimes, I guess population trials in corn, they're really good. They're important to do, but I sometimes think they get kind of boring. So what else can we be, maybe tying to that? Or can we tie another factor to the population? I think that's really important, because a lot of times when you do look at higher population in corn, that probably should come with more intensive nutrient management, maybe some other management factors, where that's where I get a little bit more excited if we can layer some of those factors on top of each other, Allie.
Yeah, and I think, as we talk about corn in comparison to soybeans, you hit on this in segment number 1, but it is important to remember that with a lot of these trials, whether it's the population versus adding other factors like fungicide or nutrient management, there's a lot of really great just card in, card out trials that allow you to not have to really do too much additional work to get these working across your operation. So, one thing I look at is if we can do some randomized blocks between maybe 2 different populations on the corn side of things. I think it is really interesting for starters, maybe to split half those blocks with a fungicide application, those without, maybe split the other half with a higher rate of, AMS in 32 and a lower rate on the other blocks. So there's so many different ways that you can split information. But one piece right now that I'm really intrigued to look at, Josh, and I think you've had a lot of questions about this too, is how could we assess in-furrow fungicides across our operations? There's some new products in the marketplace, and I think it's really becoming a greater topic of conversation currently.
Yeah, it really has. And it's been one of probably the most common question I've got from customers the last 3-4 weeks is there are some new products on the market from an in-furrow fungicide standpoint that look exciting. They're intriguing. The translocation, the length of activity, in some cases, we're looking at some in-furrow applications that, can help manage some northern corn leaf blight and gray leaf spot, which you look at how long that's hanging on, that's pretty impressive. And we've done a little bit of prior work in this space, Allie. The one thing we found with in-furrow fungicide, maybe outside of the disease control, is we've seen a little bit better stand establishment. Final stand counts have been better. So that's just some benefits we've seen from some previous work. Previously, we really couldn't get the translocation and the long-term benefits, and now there's some products out there that maybe got that capability. And I think if you're setting up a trial like this, you could look at, could you set up half the planter to have it, or could you split the farm? Obviously we got to do some things there. Looks like these products we can add right to liquid fertilizer, which makes it really easy, where we don't got to have a special system. But a lot of really neat things there, and I'm kind of excited about it when you think about getting closer to the Mississippi River, or really east of Highway 52, where we have a lot of acres that, because of woods and terrain and side hills, that, a foliar application of fungicide at tassel just isn't realistic. And I'm kind of excited. Could this be an alternative to maybe take place of some of that? Again, we're talking probably a $15 to $20 investment in furrow. So it is a big investment, but at the same time, it would be huge if we could get some of those benefits on those acres that we can't get over the top.
Yeah, so I thought you laid that out really well. And I think, bottom line here for folks listening is that is if you too have any question about some of these in-furrow fungicides and how they're going to work on farm, I think there's going to be a lot of trials or folks trying those on farm this year. So more data to come, after we assess that post-harvest this year. But, a lot to assess in that space of things. I think kind of sticking on that same tune of just what are new things to keep your eye on as we move forward. I'd say the biological space is, getting larger and larger. And I think certainly whether we're talking biologicals, micronutrients, or really any other high management practices, it's important to remember they're not a replacement for just that sound crop management, kind of the basics. But, I think if we look at having adequate nitrogen and phosphorus managements, and then taking, biologicals per se as an opportunity to kind of take that next step. I think it's an exciting space right now that folks are still currently exploring. And I think they've proven so far to be effective at increasing crop yields, but still a lot to learn. Any comments on that, Josh?
Yeah, I'll probably break them into two segments. One, you mentioned the micronutrients side of things, and I think it is in today's production. We probably need to, especially if you're in furrow starter. I think some kind of a micronutrient pack. Obviously, we talk a lot about zinc, but there are some products that put some other nutrients in furrow. And I think doing some homework on that and really finding the best one. I just think if you look at high yield management, I think that's almost a must today, especially coming into some improved commodity prices. I just think we really want to try to drive yield. The biological space, still a lot to learn there. The one thing I always try to point out is also understand, your seed provider Pioneer. We have some stuff that's on our seed already. I think it's important, number one, understand maybe what's coming with the seed, and then start doing some more homework on, hey, what do I have already, and what are some other things I could take a look at that could maybe drive early emergence, early root growth, which this far north I just think are really, really important. So yeah, a lot of great ideas, and don't be shy to reach out if you got questions on these, and be sure to tune in next week, and we'll be talking some more digital with our new digital lead, Sam. So be sure to tune in then.
You've been listening to Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060. If you've missed part of the show or want to hear more, check out the show page at kfilradio.com or with the 103.1 KFIL app. Stay connected with Allie and Josh on Twitter. It's at Allie Gwise, WISE, and at Josh Schaffner to submit your questions for the show. Tune in next Wednesday for the next Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060. We'll see you at 11 a.m.